My name is Ricky. I'm from the Council for the Homeless. For those few of you in the audience who may not be involved or know about the homelessness sector, Council for the Homeless is the umbrella organisation for agencies working with homeless people throughout Northern Ireland. We have around about 90 members, most of them working directly with homeless people in regard to housing or support or advice services, but we do have some individual members, we have some ex-service users and members, and we have a number of statutory agencies. And I suppose over the years we have had as an organisation, a very intimate relationship with the Supporting People programme. We had for 6 years a number of staff employed and staff shared with NIFA who helped our joint members to come to terms with the changes that were involved in the Supporting People programme and to help them to develop in ways that would make them be able to meet some of the regulation and inspection and sort of structures that were going to be placed on them in order to access funding in the future and to be able to further develop services. So I suppose from that vantage point I can state categorically that the Supporting People programme has dramatically and significantly changed the landscape of homelessness services over the last 11 years. And what I hope to do, quite briefly, is to have a look at an overview of what has happened, both sort of practically and also in terms of the nature of our organisations, and then look at some of the challenges and opportunities. Some of those will have already been mentioned because they are universal to all of us who are in receipt of Supporting People funding. Some of those are more unique and particular to the homelessness sector. That one. Oh, I turned it off. Not that one. Oh, Cameron's going to do this for me. Right, well, if we have a look at this slide, you can see how significantly investment has been in homelessness services from 2003 to the present day. A total investment of £236 million. And really, in that period, there have been a yearly increase from 16 million per annum to 26 million, of which approximately 6 million is floating support. Now, how that translates into service delivery is important in itself. Capacity for those people who find themselves in the position of homelessness has doubled to 5,000 places. Now, of those places, we are looking at 3,200 being floating support services delivered to people who have been homeless in their own homes in order to maintain and sustain their tenancies or to prevent homelessness in the first place. If I look back to 2003, our member organisations would have been offering around about 1,300 accommodation places, so that's an increase in about 600 actual physical bed spaces in temporary accommodation. But I think what is the most amazing, and it just shows you how incestuous the housing arena is, because Lucinda McMurran from NIFA, once upon a time at the beginning of Supporting People programme, was our development officer for floating support. And we had one floating support service in Northern Ireland, and that was run by Triangle, where Chris is the chief executive. And so we have gone from having Triangle having a floating support service, which was unique in Northern Ireland, and Lucy Campfield, who ran it, used to come and do training for us around what it might look like to deliver one, to having 3,200 floating support places. I mean, that is something that you would possibly never envisage, that level of growth. And there are now 130 services being delivered in regard to homeless people from a wide continuum, from those floating support services preventing people's homelessness right through to housing first and wet hostel provision and everything in between, and all kinds of specialisms between addiction, mental ill health, older homeless people, families with children at risk. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Thought maybe just a quick look, and I'll just put it up that you can see it, about some of the actual things that have happened in the Northwest over the last 2 years. And these are tied in, and this is very important, these are actually tied in to the objectives, the 4 key objectives of the homelessness strategy. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that synergy, as Brian says, is between homelessness and supporting people. The first two objectives that we have in the strategy are the prevention at the forefront of service delivery and reducing the length of time people experience homelessness. And if we look here just in one region in Northern Ireland, what has happened in the last couple of years, new and innovative services in regard to tenancy sustainment, in regard to extension of existing floating support, in specialisations around criminal justice, in looking at resettlement and getting people back into the community in the first place, for people with addiction problems in Methodist City Mission, and women and children who have been subject to domestic violence in Clarendon Street Shelter. The third objective of the strategy is about removing the need to sleep rough. And we have had, with the support of supporting people in the Foyle area, the development of a whole new rough sleeper strategy for that area, working conjointly with a number of organisations delivering different types of services to meet different types of needs. What we've had in particular is an extension of Foyle Haven, looking at harm reduction services and the development of community hubs and bringing in other organisations to help support the work with rough sleepers. Looking at an extension of floating support and particularly around harm reduction, because in homelessness services way back yonder, perhaps in 2003, we still were in the position where we would have been looking for abstinence as people almost earning the right to be given services, and one of those in terms of alcohol would be that you can't play in our house if you don't stop drinking or you don't stop taking drugs or whatever. That has now changed, and we're looking at supporting people developing and maintaining harm reduction services, including, very importantly, a wet service in the House in the Wells, which, interestingly, many years ago, I've worked 30 years in housing and homelessness, it's not really sad, but many, many years ago, the House in the Wells used to be a wet hostel. And then the clientele changed and the external environment changed and ideology changes, and it stopped. And now it has started to have a wet environment again, and also the development of night support service. Objective number 4 is about improving services to vulnerable households, because we know and research proves that people who have existing vulnerabilities are more likely to lose their homes at some stage in their life journey. And so some of these are directly the extension of existing homelessness provision, which would be the extension and the moving of Simon Community's Bond Hill facility on a whole young homeless people. But then we're looking at mental ill health. We're looking at learning and physical disability. We're looking at particularly around children at risk, and we're looking at young people in the Sleat shelter programme in Omagh. So all of those very specific vulnerable groups being supported via homelessness funding and supporting people. But I think that possibly one of the greatest areas of change that supporting people has brought to us, and one where we need to continue to grow and develop, is around quality, governance and accountability. Now, our sector did not come lightly into this arena. There is no doubt about it. The vast majority of homeless providers had very strong ethical and value-driven service provision. They had mission statements, and they had a way of looking at the world that was based upon that vocation, with boards of management that were drawn from local communities who had a passion and a commitment to look after the most vulnerable in their societies, but not necessarily the skills that were attached to developing a business. And in fact, most of our members in the Council for the Homeless would not have considered themselves to be a business in any way whatsoever. Now, I am not saying that our members did not deliver high-quality, targeted services, because they did. But what they didn't do was have a regulation and inspection structure and a format for reporting on outcomes. And this was very, very difficult. And they wouldn't necessarily have had significantly good business-led models. They looked after their money and they did it well, but they didn't necessarily have the kind of models of accountability and structures in place. And this was a big part, certainly, of the work of the Federation of Housing Associations and the Council for the Homeless at the start and for the first few years of supporting people in trying to ensure that our members were fit to report on outcomes, to actually prove what they were doing, that words were no longer enough saying, well, we know we make a difference. It was, this is how we make a difference and this is what it looks like. And starting to actually think and concentrate upon what that difference should look like. And that has been highly beneficial. It has driven up quality. It has looked at continual improvement. It has started to make us look at innovation and to listen to service users and what their aspirations are and to meet people where they're at. And it's been absolutely brilliant. Now here comes the quote. And did any of you guess that my little red soul would have been quoting a member of the royal family? But there you are. Part of it is because I'm really lazy and it was the best quote I could find on Google. And I was trying to work out if I could change the name, but I thought maybe somebody might know who had quoted it and I would get caught on. I was going to say Mahatma Gandhi or somewhere, but anywho, I think that this is true. I think that by our human nature, we do tend to see change as being a threat. And what we need to do is to look and say, this is not a threat, there may be challenges. And as Fiona said, to go over, to go under, to go round, to dodge, or whatever, or to meet head on. But we do not need to see these as a threat, and we do not want to be in a position, because when we are threatened, we will circle the wagons and we will fight and we will compete with each other. And when we compete with each other, it will be to the detriment of those that we exist to serve. And we need to wise up and not do this. So a very quick tour, because I'm very conscious that we were running very late, through what I see to be the challenges. And some of the particular challenges that are facing homelessness, but some of those that are general to us. And I think the first thing is ring fencing. We know the removal of the ring fence of the Supporting People programme in England and Wales has been an unmitigated disaster. Not just a disaster for organisations. And I would be one of the first people to say that we are there to do a job, people. We are not there to protect our organisations and keep people in work. We are not there to maintain that kind of status quo. Much as it is close to all of our hearts and much as we feel very strongly about the organisations we work for, we need to be looking at maintaining our service. And we need this ring fence to maintain our service. Because services have been lost, and those services have been lost to catastrophic consequences in some parts of England in regard to homelessness and what is available. And to be brutally honest, it has cost the public purse more. And we touched upon that, and Paddy was talking earlier in his question about service users using, homeless service users using A&E as opposed to being able to access GP services. And if you put that across the broad spectrum of losing services, what that might look like financially. And all of this discussion around departmental responsibility. Now, the homelessness sector has been reassured by our department, our lead department, that should there be a transfer of the Supporting People budget or part of the Supporting People budget to the Department of Health, that this will not be in the area of homelessness. Because there is recognition that homeless services are housing support. We also don't have any other money, other way of existing. We are completely dependent on Supporting People funding, because certainly most accommodation-based services are delivered in partnership. Housing benefit comes in, housing benefit gets paid in rent. A small amount may be kept for housing management, but on a whole, housing benefit gets paid in rent, and rents are likely to increase, but that's for another day. But also, we don't get vast quantities of money on contracts with health and social care. We are housing support, we are homelessness, we are housing. And so we have been told that our bit of the money, that 26 million or whatever with inflation, will stay within housing and not move should a move take place. But I have real concerns of this. I see another SNMA looming. I see the residualisation of our funding. I see it suddenly becoming like an appendix that sort of is there but doesn't have any function really, that doesn't get bumped up year on year with inflation, that we're almost the forgotten people. If it is not tied into a wider programme and that it is seen to have massive value in relation not just to homeless people, but in relation to mental ill health, in relation to addiction services, in relation to promoting employment and all of those other things, we cannot be left to wither on the vine. And I think that we should be keeping housing support within housing. Secondly, I think there is the problem of inflation, and that's been touched upon. This has made a great big difference to us in regard to salaries, in how we work out what we're paying. I mean, things have gone up. So if we look at fuel costs, if we look at all those other costs, inflationary uplifts through the roof, a minimum of 1.8%, and we are sitting languishing 7 years on with no commitment and a lot of sort of open and unfulfilled promises from our department that they might look at things individually, that they mightn't look at them at all, that, well, sorry, everybody's in the same boat. Well, actually, I don't know if we are in the same boat, because it's not just us that suffers, it's the 17,000 people at any one time who get services. Tendering and procurement, we have looked, I mean, that has been talked about quite a lot, and I was encouraged to hear that we're not necessarily going to look down the road of tendering every service. I think that that would be very difficult. We looked at the Seans of this world. Once again, this is not about a production line. You know, this is more than a transaction. This is about people's lives. This is about vulnerable people who, what happens if they have a complete change in staff? What happens if they maybe have to move premises because the premises don't suit? What does that do to those people if we tender successful services? I am not saying that we shouldn't procure new services, and the new commissioning structures, and I'll touch on those a little bit on our opportunities, are going to be a good thing. But I think we need to be very, very careful as to why we do this, that it shouldn't just be about saving money, that it should be absolutely ensuring that we are maintaining people's quality of life, that it's not just about budgets. And it sure as heck should not be about transferring our services into the private sector so that they make lots of profit, they pay dreadful wages, and they can't afford quality staff. And we must resist that to our final breath by showing what we do. Outcome reporting, I think, is going to become more difficult. And I think we already have outcome reporting, but I think it is likely to become slightly more challenging. We're going to have to do a bit more on proving what we do, and we need to be involved. One of our challenges is trying to take ownership over this and be involved in setting what the outcomes are. We don't need people who don't work in our sector telling us what an outcome is in somebody's life. We need to be saying and proving that this is what an outcome is. And I think in many ways this also ties back into some of the stuff around procurement. Very worrying advent in England around payment by results. And payment by results in regard to housing support services working with vulnerable people. I find that sits very uneasily with the rhetoric of both this government and the previous government around personal responsibility, around personalisation, around all of those things. Because if we give an individual and we believe that they should have personal responsibility and take that responsibility for the decisions, i.e. the outcomes they make in their own life, how can you take money off provider organisations because the outcome is that that person goes into the community, decides to start drinking again and ends up back in your service? There has to be a balance there. You have to show that you've done the best of your ability, that you're working with the people, that you're giving them and empowering them to make decisions in their own right. But sorry, we cannot be judged and we cannot be supported by government on the basis of an individual's choices after they leave our service. And I think we also need to be looking at how we rethink our options in homelessness. There is a big drive, and we know there's a drive towards the discharge of duty within the private rented sector. What does that mean for us? You know, what does that mean for us in terms of maintaining temporary accommodation and shared temporary accommodation? What does that mean for us in delivering services that in floating support, not just with our partners in housing association movement, but in building relationships with the private rented sector? What does it mean about the hours that we are going to do in regard to delivering those services? What are those options? And we need to think about those very carefully. And finally, and I'm just about on time, I want to have a wee look at what the opportunities are. There has been a number of comments made during the morning about listening to users, and I think that the landscape has changed in that respect. Part of it is to do with the Supporting People programme, because that has been one of our quality assessment targets, to work with our service users. And I have to say that there's one of the areas that the Supporting People programme itself has been really pretty poor at. In fact, I could think of a few four-letter Anglo-Saxon words, but I won't disgrace myself. But way back in dim and distant time, in 2002, when we had this sort of group made up about how we were going to develop and deliver supporting people, there was a lot of talk about providers groups and service users groups and whatever, and it never came to anything, and 11 years on, it still hasn't. But within the homelessness sector, it has in terms of individual providers. Not only that, we have networks of people who have had experience of homelessness and drug and alcohol abuse, and some of those groups, those service user groups, are now constituted as charities in their own right. They're working together to be able to articulate their voice in the public arena. The same applies to young homeless people, and supporting people have been very good, along with health, in supporting that particular area, and young people are developing the skills to be able to say what their aspirations are and what would work for them. And I think that that is a real opportunity for us to shape services, because, if we allow our service users to have their voice, they can then help us campaign. If they understand the value of this programme and feel that they are empowered and have ownership over it, we then have gained the most important ally of all, the people that we exist to serve. And isn't that what we want? Isn't that what each one of our organisations want? I put up contracts, not grants, because my chairman very interestingly said to me yesterday at another meeting, well, if we do go down the line of actually having contracts would be a really good thing, because he actually is the chief executive of First Housing, and they have the new tenancy sustainment project, and it is a contract, which means they're contracted to do a certain bit of work. And it's a bit like the guy who is making the toilet rolls. If you can make the toilet rolls cheaper, well, yippee-yi-yay, you get to keep the difference. It's called profit. Dear me, we're not talking about profit. What we're talking about, Stephen, is unrestricted reserves. And we have very little opportunity in order to accrue unrestricted reserves within the homelessness sector. And those reserves have proved vitally important to the sustainment of services over the last 7 years, when my member organisations have had no inflationary uplift. How have they been able to meet their contractual obligations and to deliver services without using those reserves? If we have contracts, it may be that we will be in the position where we will be able and enabled to gather up unrestricted reserves. But it may be a small price to pay for a big change. But I'm just throwing it out there to keep Kevin happy. We have talked about the synthesis of homelessness and SP structures. I'm going to come to it last, if you don't mind. I just working to our strengths and sharing them, I have touched on, and that is the whole idea about competition and not letting ourselves be put into competition with each other. I'm not talking about mergers. We've been down that road, haven't we, Brian? What I am talking about is us working smarter, working collaboratively, agreeing that we each should be owning our own stuff. We should know what areas we're good at, not have to be jumping out of those areas, but saying, how can I improve and build on what I'm doing by working with other agencies who could bring this to the table and I could bring this to theirs, and to share and to start to look at that. And it's certainly a piece of work that we're going to be hoping to do with our members this year, to start that discussion off from a position of openness and trust and saying, right, what can we do together that will actually mean that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. But the big thing for us in homelessness, and the really, really good thing, is this joining together with the new restructuring internally in the Housing Executive of homelessness and supporting people services. And what I would like to say, and not just because Brian put homelessness up as number one priority, but certainly we have had major, major unsettling change in homelessness over the last year, as have other areas. We've had all the changes in welfare reform that have come in regard to housing benefit that are making it much more difficult for people to access the right type of accommodation. We have had the pressure upon the private rented sector because it's been hard to get mortgages, so the amount of houses available to move people out of homelessness has been difficult. We have had reviews of temporary accommodation. We have had all the talk about the reform of social housing. We're looking at social allocation changes, and it has been really, really quite scary. it seems as if there has just been a weight of negativity and how you work your way through that. And one of the really good things that we've had that has come out of this is the putting together of homelessness and supporting people under the one directorate, and having members of staff within that team that we know and we trust. Not necessarily always agree with, but know and trust. And that makes a big, big difference, because if people actually know your work, they've been out to your projects, they know what you do, they've seen the effort that you put into it, and they want to fund that, and they want to support you in your difficulties and help you deliver new and innovative services, that's a really good thing. We have new structures coming in, relaunched last week, in regard to the homelessness strategy, that this is the perfect timing for. We're looking at 4 key priorities as opposed to 37 that we had sort of given ourselves, which is maybe a little bit ambitious. And those 4 priorities will tie very much into this. One is looking at common assessment, and assessment is vital to make sure we are giving the services, and the supporting people money is going to the right people, and the services are there to meet assessed need. We're looking at some kind of common access point so that people aren't running about all over the shop, and that should make it easier then to be looking at what kind of housing support services we are delivering and roads into that. We're looking at housing options, and housing options is going to be an opportunity and a challenge where we start to look at how that links in with supporting people and how we are delivering our services as part of those options, how we are ensuring that if people are not given a homelessness assessment as such, but who have potential to become homeless, how we fit in as the homelessness sector in ensuring the prevention of homelessness and mediation and advocacy and all of those kind of services. And finally, looking at Housing First. And Housing First, I thought was quite interesting, actually, something that our first speaker said when she was talking about home as the hub. Now, she was talking about home as the hub and bringing services into people's homes. That was presupposing that people had homes in the first place. Housing First is trying to do that. It is trying to ensure that people have homes in the first place. But for these particular people, in order to maintain those homes, we need to hold the Department of Health to these words, that we need to have mechanisms in place to keep people at home, and that is immensely important to health and social care. And one of our concerns around Housing First is the revenue and resource commitment from health to deliver health and social care services to people in Housing First services. Because our members are housing providers, and they do their best, but they are not funded by health in many cases to provide specialist services. And if they are providing specialist services, that needs to be funded by health. And I think that that is a very useful commitment to have, and hopefully the new commissioning structures that are being set up with providers and service users there will be able to make that case. So a new focus and a new vision. I think in homelessness we do have a new focus. We've got this new structure where it's going to be bottom up in local regions with providers and service users and a whole load of people saying where gaps are and what's needed in local areas, from the top down interdepartmentally. A new vision, I don't think we need a new vision in homelessness. We've got a good vision. Our vision is to end homelessness, and we understand that, and it matters to us. And in fact, it is the basis of all our values. But we do need now to incorporate other people in our vision. We need to incorporate the department to be committed to take responsibility for bringing in other government departments. We need them to take a commitment that they are the lead in regard to the delivery of the homelessness strategy and to fund it appropriately. And we need to extend that vision to the general public, to say that ultimately homeless people are citizens of Northern Ireland, and with the help of the Supporting People funding and our MLAs and those who actually care, we can make a difference. Thank you.